The silver bullet tore through the creature's chest with a wet thud, but instead of falling, it turned around and smiled at me with blood-soaked human teeth. That's when I realized I'd just shot the wrong person, and somewhere in the darkness behind me, something much worse was already moving. But let me back up and tell you how I ended up in that alley, holding a smoking gun and staring at my biggest mistake in 20 years of hunting monsters. My name is Thomas Kane. I'm 42 years old, and I hunt werewolves for a living. Not exactly the career path my high school guidance counselor had in mind, but here we are. Most people think what I do is glamorous, like some action movie where the hero always knows who the bad guy is, and silver bullets solve everything clean and simple. The reality is mostly driving 12 hours to some godforsaken mountain town to discover the monster is actually a rabid coyote, and some very creative local folklore. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was cleaning my equipment in the cramped garage of my Denver apartment. The encrypted phone buzzed twice, my signal for a legitimate contract. 20 years in this business, and I've learned to tell the difference between genuine supernatural activity and people looking for someone to blame their problems on. Kane, I answered, balancing the phone against my shoulder while I polished the silver core ammunition that keeps me alive. Mr. Kane, my name is Bill Morrison. I run cattle up in Millfield, Colorado. His voice shook like autumn leaves. I need your help. Lost 12 head in 2 weeks, and whatever's doing it ain't natural. I'd heard this speech before. Ranchers losing livestock, always convinced it's something supernatural instead of wolves or bears or teenagers with too much time and too little supervision. But something in Morrison's voice made me pay attention. A bone-deep terror that you can't fake. Tell me about the kills, I said, setting down my cleaning cloth, torn apart but precise, like something knew exactly where to bite for maximum damage. And the blood. He paused, swallowing hard. There ain't any blood left, Mr. Kane. They're drained dry. That got my attention. Werewolves are messy killers. They tear and rend in their feeding frenzy. Clean kills with blood drainage suggested something else entirely, or possibly a werewolf with unusual self-control. Both options made my skin crawl. I'll be there by nightfall, I told him. And Mr. Morrison, stay inside after dark until I arrive. The drive to Millfield took me through some of the most beautiful and isolated country in Colorado. Winding mountain roads, dense forests, and the kind of silence that makes city folk nervous. Perfect werewolf territory, really. Lots of wildlife to hunt, minimal human interference, and enough remote caves and cabins to hide a pack for years. Millfield itself was barely a dot on the map. Population 300 according to the faded welcome sign, though I suspected that was optimistic. One main street, a general store, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1970, and a motel that made me question my life choices. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, and strangers stick out like neon signs. The desk clerk at the Pineview Motel was a nervous woman in her 50s who kept glancing toward the windows as the sun set behind the mountains. She handed me the key to room 7 without making eye contact. "You hear about the Morrison situation?" she asked quietly. "Pest control," I replied, giving her my standard cover story. "Wild animal problems." She nodded quickly, then leaned across the counter. "Listen, mister, I don't know what kind of pest control you do, but you'd best stay inside after dark. Things have been different lately." Wrong, if you catch my meaning. I caught it all right. In 20 years of hunting monsters, I'd learned that locals always know more than they let on. The trick is getting them to talk before it's too late. I met Morrison at his ranch just as the last light faded from the sky. He was exactly what I'd pictured. Weathered 60-year-old widower with hands like leather and eyes that had seen too much recently. His ranch sprawled across a valley between 2 forested ridges. The kind of place that probably looked peaceful during the day but felt exposed and vulnerable in the darkness. "Appreciate you coming, Mr. Kane," he said, leading me toward the killing sites. "Sheriff thinks it's just wolves, but I've been ranching this land for 30 years. I know what wolf kills look like." He showed me the first site with a heavy-duty flashlight. Even in the harsh LED glare, I could see this wasn't normal predation. The cattle had been arranged, not randomly scattered like you'd expect from a feeding frenzy, but positioned with an almost ritualistic precision, and Morrison was right about the blood. The ground should have been soaked, but it was clean except for a few drops here and there. "When did the attack start?" I asked, photographing the scene with a UV camera. Werewolf saliva fluoresces under ultraviolet light, one of the few reliable ways to track them. "About 6 weeks ago. Lost 2 steers the first night, thought it was just bad luck. Then it kept happening." Morrison's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My neighbor Jenkins. His dog went missing 3 nights ago. Found what was left yesterday morning. I played the UV light across the ground and found what I was looking for. Glowing tracks leading from the kill site toward the forest. But these weren't the massive paw prints I expected. They were human footprints. Barefoot, adult-sized, heading directly into the densest part of the woods. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "have there been any missing persons reports lately? Hikers, campers, anyone who might have wandered into your area?" His face went pale in the flashlight beam. "3 hikers went missing about a month ago. City folks from Denver. Came up here for a weekend camping trip. Search and rescue looked for a week but never found so much as a backpack. 3 missing hikers, livestock, drained of blood, and human tracks at the kill sites. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. I need to follow these tracks," I told Morrison. "You should head back to the house." "Like hell," he replied firmly. "This is my land, my cattle, my fight. I'm coming with you." I should have insisted he stay behind. In 20 years of hunting monsters, I've learned that civilians always complicate things. But Morrison knew these woods better than I did, and something about his determination reminded me why I'd gotten into this business in the first place. Sometimes ordinary people need someone to stand between them and the darkness. We followed the tracks deeper into the forest than any reasonable person should go. The UV light showed a clear trail through the underbrush, but it was the other details that worried me. Broken branches at shoulder height, claw marks on tree trunks, and an increasingly strong smell of decay and musk that made my nose wrinkle. Morrison was sweating despite the cold mountain air, and he kept checking over his shoulder like he expected something to be following us. I'd seen that behavior before, the hypervigilance that comes from being hunted. But there was something else in his movements, a familiarity with the terrain that seemed almost too perfect. "You come out here often?" I asked as we navigated around a fallen log. "Used to hunt these woods as a kid," he replied quickly. "Know every trail and deer path for miles." But that wasn't quite right. He wasn't following trails. He was leading us through the forest with the kind of instinctive navigation that suggested he'd been here recently. Very recently. We found the campsite 20 minutes deeper into the woods. 3 tents, still partially set up but torn and scattered. Camping gear strewn across a small clearing, and the cold remains of a fire pit. But no bodies, no blood, no obvious signs of violence beyond the destroyed equipment. "Search and rescue missed this?" I asked, examining the scene. Morrison nodded, but his eyes were darting around the clearing like he was looking for something specific. Must have been hidden by the tree cover when they flew over. I played the UV light across the campsite and found more of those glowing tracks. Lots of them, leading in multiple directions. But there was something else. Human clothing hung from tree branches like decorations, and carved into the trunk of the largest pine was a symbol I'd seen before. A rough circle with 3 claw marks through it. "Pack territory marker, Mr. Morrison," I said slowly. I think we should head back now. But when I turned around, he was gone, vanished into the darkness without a sound, leaving me alone in a werewolf pack's territory with nothing but a UV light and the growing certainty that I'd walked straight into a trap. The howl started low and distant, but it was wrong. Too intelligent, with an almost musical quality that made my skin crawl. It was answered by another howl from the opposite direction, then another from behind me. I was surrounded. I drew my pistol and checked the chamber. 4 silver bullets, blessed by 3 different priests and inscribed with protective runes. In 20 years of hunting monsters, those bullets had never failed me, but I'd never faced an entire pack before, and I was starting to understand why. The first one stepped into the clearing like it owned the place, and I suppose it did. It walked upright on legs that were too long for its torso, covered in coarse gray fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Its face was a nightmare fusion of human and wolf. Intelligent eyes above a muzzle full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. When it spoke, its voice was a gravelly approximation of human speech. "Thomas Kane," it said, and my blood turned to ice water. "We've been expecting you." 3 more emerged from the tree line, surrounding me in the small clearing, all partially transformed, all walking the line between human and monster that made werewolves so terrifying. They could think like humans but kill like predators, plan like generals but feed like animals. "Where's Morrison?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The largest one, clearly the pack leader, tilted its head and made a sound that might have been laughter. "Oh, Bill's around. He's the one who called you after all. Set up this whole meeting." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Morrison's familiarity with the woods, his insistence on coming along, the way he'd led me directly to the pack's territory. I'd been played by an expert, and now I was going to pay for my stupidity. "You see, Thomas," the leader continued, "we have a problem. Hunters like you make it difficult for our kind to expand into new territories. So we've developed a new strategy. Let the hunter come to us." Morrison stepped out from behind one of the trees, but he wasn't the weathered rancher I'd met a few hours earlier. His transformation was partial but unmistakable. Elongated limbs, patches of fur, and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. When he spoke, his voice was thick with regret but also something else. Relief. "I'm sorry, Kane," he said, "but you don't understand what it's like. The hunger, the constant need to hunt and feed. When they offered me a way to satisfy it without hurting innocent people." "By feeding me to your pack," I interrupted. "By turning you," the leader corrected. "Your skills, your knowledge, your connections in the hunting community. Imagine what we could accomplish with someone like you on our side." I raised my pistol, but the leader just smiled with too many teeth. 4 bullets, 5 targets, and that's assuming your aim is perfect and we don't move. Care to recalculate your odds? That's when I learned something new about werewolves. They don't just hunt in packs, they think in packs. While the leader had been talking, the others had been moving into position. Escape routes blocked, high ground claimed, every advantage seized with military precision. But 20 years of hunting monsters teaches you more than just how to shoot silver bullets. It teaches you how to think like prey when you need to survive. I shot the leader first, center mass, and rolled left as the others charged. The silver bullet dropped him instantly. Werewolves might be tough, but blessed silver through the heart is still fatal. 1 down, 3 to go, and I was already moving toward the tree line. Morrison caught me before I made it to cover, his partially transformed state giving him inhuman speed and strength. We went down hard, rolling across the forest floor as his claws raked across my jacket. Up close, I could smell the musk and decay that clung to him, could see the human intelligence trapped behind increasingly animal eyes. "I don't want to kill you," he gasped. struggling to maintain human speech as his transformation accelerated. But I can't stop myself when it takes over. I managed to get the pistol between us and fired. The silver bullet took him through the chest, and the light died in his eyes instantly. But his death cry brought the other two running, and I was down to 2 bullets with nowhere to hide. The next few minutes were pure survival instinct, running through dense forest in near total darkness, pursued by creatures that could see in the dark and move faster than any human had a right to. I used every trick I'd learned in 20 years, doubling back on my own trail, using the terrain to break line of sight, making noise in one direction while moving in another. But they were learning my patterns, adapting to my tactics. Werewolves aren't just strong and fast. They're intelligent pack hunters with all the advantages of their environment. I was outmatched, outgunned, and rapidly running out of options. I made my stand in a small ravine where the trees grew thick enough to limit their mobility. When the first one appeared at the edge of my vision, I put a silver bullet through its skull from 30 yards away. One left, 1 bullet, and the growing certainty that this was where my 20-year career would end. The last werewolf was smarter than the others. It didn't charge into my field of fire or try to overwhelm me with speed and aggression. Instead, it stalked me through the ravine like the apex predator it was, using every shadow and tree trunk for cover. "You killed my pack," it called out, its voice echoing off the rock walls. 20 years of planning, building our territory, establishing our hunting grounds, and you destroyed it all in one night. "That's the job," I replied, trying to locate its position by sound. Some folks call pest control for rats, others call me for monsters. And what happens when the pest control becomes the pest? I spun toward the voice, but it was already moving. These things were faster than anything had a right to be, and this one had learned from watching its packmates die. It knew I only had 1 bullet left, knew I couldn't afford to miss. The attack came from above. It had climbed into the trees while we talked, using the canopy to get above my position. I rolled aside as it dropped down where I'd been standing, and its claws gouged deep furrows in the earth. My last silver bullet took it through the throat as it landed. The werewolf collapsed in a heap of fur and twisted limbs, and suddenly the forest was quiet except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat there in the darkness for a long time, trying to process what had happened. In 20 years of hunting monsters, I'd never faced anything like this. The intelligence, the planning, the coordination. This pack had been operating at a level that suggested they were evolving beyond simple predators. Dawn was breaking by the time I made it back to Morrison's ranch. The normal world looked strange after a night in the supernatural darkness. Colors too bright, sounds too loud, everything slightly unreal. I called my cleanup contacts, filed my report, and tried to pretend that everything was normal, but it wasn't normal. Nothing about this job had been normal. The encrypted phone rang as I was loading my gear into the truck. Another contract, another town with a monster problem. I answered on the second ring, already reaching for my road atlas. "Kane, Mr. Kane, thank God you answered. My name is Sandra Mitchell, and I think we have a werewolf problem here in Granite Falls. 3 people dead, livestock mutilated, and the local sheriff insists it's just wild animals, but..." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. 20 years in this business, and the calls never stopped coming. There was always another monster, another town, another group of people who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. "I'll be there by nightfall," I told her, already calculating drive time and equipment needs. "And Mrs. Mitchell, stay inside after dark until I arrive." As I drove away from Millfield, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror more than usual. The pack was dead, the immediate threat eliminated, but something Morrison had said kept echoing in my mind. They'd been planning for 20 years, building territories, establishing hunting grounds, What if Millfield wasn't an isolated incident? What if there were other packs out there? Other carefully planned territories? What if the werewolf population was growing faster than hunters like me could contain it? People always ask me how I sleep at night, knowing what's out there in the darkness. Truth is, I don't sleep much, but knowing someone's watching the shadows, someone's ready to answer when evil calls, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do, stand guard while others dream. The phone rang again before I'd driven 10 miles. Another contract, another monster, another town that needed help. I answered on the second ring. Kane.